Hello, all. My name is Thomas Tully, and I am presenting my interpersonal communication plan. Today is November 1st, 2025, and this is for studies in interpersonal communication. So, first, I'd like to start off with the main points that I'll be going over today. Those are going to be the behavioral blend and background, some communication barriers, goals and strategies, implementation, and then conclusion, and we'll follow it up with some quotes. So first and foremost is the behavioral blend and background. So according to my behavioral blend, I am what is expected of me is competent specialist, which means I'm expected to be both submissive and competent. So when I read submissive, I at first didn't think of myself as being submissive, but then reading the the blend, I saw that it was an accurate description. I do tend to be submissive in certain scenarios, so that would be accurate. And then it said I had passive tendencies, and that's another word that I wouldn't use to describe um, me personally. But after reading and digging in a little further, I did see that it could be a bit passive. Um, Balance between people and task. This is an aspect that I do happen to agree with. I do try to keep a good balance between people and the task that I'm trying to accomplish. As far as this is me, it's competent influencing specialist. Strong people skills. I do believe I do have strong people skills, which I'll go over in background how I developed those. But mostly due to my profession and what I do need to have strong people skills. I do think I am outgoing, but on the flip side is I'm also a bit reserved. Um, I guess I can fluctuate between both depending on the scenario. And I do like to influence and interact with people. So for my background, I'm currently a law enforcement officer in the state of New Jersey. I'm a parole officer. Um, Parole officers have to wear two hats. They have to wear a law enforcement hat, and we have to wear a social worker hat. The communication skills come into play with the social worker hat, having to communicate with a parolee and get them to do what we need them to do in order to reintegrate back into society successfully, and be law abiding. Where I got my start with that is with the Air Force. I did 20 years in the United States Air Force, and I was a supervisor. And one of the good things that the Air Force does is they develop leaders and they develop followers early on. Where and when you wear the leadership hat and the followership hat is kind of what the Air Force really drills down into. Um, my challenges that I found while in both the Air Force and in law enforcement are due to my careers. So my communication challenges are directly correlated to my Air Force and law enforcement careers. And the reason why is because in the military, doing as you're told when you are told is enforced very early on. And this transferred to my current career, but that line of thinking is definitely outdated. I have recognized a few years ago that this communication style is flawed. In most scenarios, there is definitely a time and place to do as I do or do as I say, um, but it's definitely a flawed communication style. Um, and I have recognized after taking this course that I need to change it, and I took the opportunity to change it. So now we're going to talk about some of the communication barriers that I found while reading texts. So Two of the biggest communication barriers that I found is emotional regulation and listening to solve problems. The first one, emotional regulation, I found prior to this class that in communications, especially in heated communications, I allowed emotion to take over. And when emotion takes over, we we don't we don't listen to understand. We listen just to get to the next point where we get to say something. And then we end up hijacking the actual conversation and not listening. So, regulating emotion was definitely one of my biggest communication barriers that I found when I started taking this course. And then the second one, listening to solve problems, I'm guilty of that. That is one of the barriers that I very hard to overcome, because listening to solve problems, and it just, I don't know, it's my nature to want to be a helper and want to solve problems. But in reading the text, I found that it shifts the focus from listening to actual fixing. And then also, when we try to fix problems, we don't get to hear the rest of the conversation. So that's definitely a barrier that I'm trying to work on. The emotional regulation is easy to work on. The listening to solve problems, I catch myself all the time, in face-to-face conversations, in phone communications. So it's gonna be hard, but I'm gonna give it a try. Next up is the goals and strategies. So I have two goals to improve my interpersonal communication. The first is I'm going to prevent emotions from interfering in my interpersonal communication. I'm going to prevent the emotions from hijacking the conversation. I'm going to prevent emotions from interfering, because they don't help. And then I'm going to avoid trying to solve problems that are presented while communicating. I see that it does create a environment where it's hijacking, and it also, in reading Peterson, it's also implying that if I try to solve problems, that I know better than the person I'm speaking to, which is another thing we don't want to do. So we don't want to give that impression. So, how am I going to do this? So, the strategy I'll use to refrain from allowing emotions to hijack conversations, I'm going to allow the person that I'm speaking to speak. Almost, it's impractical to use the talker listener card that Peterson has in his book. But mentally, I can have the card in my head, knowing that I'm the listener when I'm listening to someone speak, and letting them finish their thoughts, before I respond to those thoughts. The strategy I'll use to refrain from trying to solve problems will be to use paraphrasing, parathinking, and feeling. Those are two. The parathink. I knew what phrasing was. I utilize it, in my communications. But parathinking and parafeeling are two new concepts, two new things that I've seen in this course, and they are both things that I am implementing in my interpersonal communication. So let me go on to implementation. So implementation, I will define clear roles in my communication. Defining clear roles, we go back to the talker listener card that Peterson um, uh, explains. So define clear roles, and effective communication will enhance the conversation, and it'll prevent barriers such as problem solving and conversation hijacking from occurring, which is the two things I want to avoid. And then I'm going to define the purpose of the communication. A lot of times I guess that could be also a communication barrier. So defining the purpose, I go into a conversation, and that's where the emotion takes over, and it goes from one purpose to another purpose, and then it just kind of like goes down this rabbit hole that never gets anything solved. So Peterson says the purpose of communication is not winning or losing in a conversation, but is understanding and connecting. So in conclusion, the goal of my communication plan should be to listen and to understand. Um, and by doing that, it'll create a safe environment for the person that I'm speaking with. And through creating safe environments, barriers to communication can be lowered and mutual goals can be met. I'm going to end with two quotes. One is from a author that I've actually listened. I've had the pleasure of hearing speak twice. His story is very, very inspirational. It's Nick Lavery. He's a Green Beret in the United States Army. He's a above the knee amputee who went back to active duty. And he said, for the greats, that's what practice is: controlled and intentional failure. Because the only way to know our limitations is to reach the limit truly. We have to live at the edge of our capability. And then the last one, I took a Bible verse out of Proverbs 18:21, and it's one of these things that when I read it, I was like, this really does apply to interpersonal communication. And Proverbs 18:21 says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits." So that about wraps up my video. I appreciate you listening, and have a great day.